final
So
decision the court
obviously
made?
the case started with Vice President Biti reading in the newspaper that he had assaulted a woman. And then the rumors started flying. Thereafter, Patrick Chinamasa, who's the spokesperson, acting spokesperson of ZANU-PF, then started making threats that the police should proceed to arrest Tendai Biti. Following that, government officials such as Mr. Nick Mangwana also started making those threats. So upon hearing that, as a diligent officer of the court, Vice President Biti approached the police himself. It's important to state that he wasn't summoned by the police, but he went to the police to clear his name because he was surprised at this fabricated allegation. So upon attending the police station at around 11 yesterday, which is Friday, he was then advised that the police actually had an intention to detain him. He wasn't then allowed to go. And one of the key complaints he raises against the police is that he was now in custody following his own cooperation with the court. He was denied food from 11 to 6 a.m. COVID regulations were not observed whatsoever. The police weren't wearing masks, there was no sanitizer, there was no social distancing. And then by 2 p.m. yesterday, the docket was already ready, and he insisted that, look, given that the docket is ready and we've got a right to a fair, speedy trial within a reasonable time, the right to dignity, the presumption of innocence and all those rights, he then indicated that, look, together with his lawyers, obviously, you can take me to court now and we can deal with the remand hearing. As we all know, remand hearings should be a quick process, especially given that bail is a constitutional entitlement. I think the Constitution is quite clear on the rights of arrested persons and detained persons. The police declined, and upon the legal practitioners asking why they were delaying and why they were delaying taking him to court and refusing to take him to court even though all the papers were ready, no answer was given by the investigating officer until 6 p.m. when he was then summarily advised that he was going to spend the night in cells. The police and the lawyer, Mr. Alec Mchadihama, inquired, why is it necessary to detain someone overnight? He's got a right to liberty, he's cooperated with the police. If you want him to come tomorrow to court, you can just warn him and summon him and he will come. Without giving any reason, they then took him to the cells. Obviously, there was no water in the cell, there was no sanitizer. The other persons who were detained had no masks, and obviously this is a huge COVID-19 risk. I think we all know what's going on concerning the pandemic. Come to this morning, he was handcuffed, even though at no point he attempted to, evade arrest or not cooperate with the police. He's now handcuffed, and in his handcuffed state, he was bundled into the back of an open truck. So imagine you're trying to balance in a, bungling open truck, and you're wearing these handcuffs. These are some of the issues that Mr. Biti's lawyers were raising in the court today. The undignified manner in which he was treated, the denial of his or the violation of his right to liberty, and obviously, the indignity and exposure to COVID-19 given the circumstances of his cell when he could have just easily gone home and then come. We all know that he's not a flight risk. He's already facing 2 charges and he's diligently come to this court. He's an honourable member of parliament. He's a legal practitioner who practices here. He would not evade attending court or fail to appear in court on the basis of this flimsy charge. Coming to the charge itself, the technical aspects are that he has been advised to come back to court on the 18th of January for trial commencement. He's been granted bail in the sum of 10,000 Zimbabwe dollars. I've spoken to some lawyers who say that this is actually more than the quantum of the fine for, this alleged assault. Coming to his defense, it's a most regrettable state of affairs and incident. What transpired is that on the 30th of November 2020, Mr. Biti, who's involved in sundry litigation concerning the Airport Road scandal, which we're all aware of, where thousands of hectares of council land were dished out while Chombo, Ignatius Chombo, was Minister of Local Government, and during a time in which there was a caretaker council that was administering the affairs of the city of Harare, they parceled thousands of hectares of land to a company called Auger Investments. This is in accordance with the instructions I've received from Mr. Biti. And sundry litigation has followed. They've been in court. I think the issue has been publicized for a while now, the corruption around that scandal and unearthing some of the deals that took place there. It's also alleged that the Russians are involved. It's alleged that top political elites going all the way up to the president may have been involved in this parceling out of land. But coming to the 30th of November, Mr. Biti was representing a client who's a victim of this corruption scandal. And when he was representing this client, the state had been ordered by the court to make available certain documents. They were supposed to have made available these documents before the case was brought to court. So the first thing he did on the 30th of November was to question, whether those documents were available. The prosecution threw a bunch of documents at him. Upon perusing these documents, he then noticed that, some of the documents that the court had ordered to be made available to him for the prosecution of the trial were not included in that bundle. So he then instructed the prosecution and said, look, please can we have these documents? If you don't have them, you're impinging upon my client's right to a fair trial. So the matter was adjourned to later on that day, and it's during this period that this lady by the name of Ms. Tatiana Aleshini, who's a Russian national, was then seen with the prosecution huddling up and giving them instructions and interfering with the proceedings. And I must emphasize that Ms. Aleshini is not a witness in the case that Mr. Biti is dealing with, representing his client, and she's not the complainant at all. So she should have no role in the case, and certainly she should not be giving instructions to the prosecution. What then ensued is that when the matter then came to be heard, Mr. Biti stood up and before the magistrate made a formal complaint about this interference with the work of the prosecution, and he named Ms. Tatiana Aleshini, whom he doesn't know personally, but whom he saw, influencing the prosecution, and he was quite concerned. And upon making this official complaint to the magistrate, she stood up from the gallery and started challenging him about, the raising of his name. After the proceedings were complete, Mr. Biti then went to his client, and while they were standing in a corner in Rotten Row Court, Tatiana Aleshini then charged at him and said, "Why are you mentioning my name?" pointing her finger at him. And she said specifically, according to his instructions, "I'm going to report you to Mr. Ken Sharp." So it's at this point that the verbal exchange ensued, but he maintains that he did not threaten her. He certainly did not assault her. And what's critical to mention in this case is that if you look at the state papers, at no point does she mention that she was assaulted. I think the words, according to the allegation, which is obviously disputed by Mr. Biti, is that, the word stupid, the word idiot were thrown around during verbal exchange. And I must emphasize that it was an exchange. And obviously, Mr. Biti denies the allegations of assault. He had no intention to assault her. He did not, in fact, assault her. And he obviously submits that the charges are politicized in nature, they're trumped up, they're flimsy, they're without foundation. A legal practitioner should not be prosecuted or otherwise, interfered with in the course and scope of representing his client, which is the clear background to this matter, added of course to the fact that underlying this entire thing is the corrupt airport road scandal and the thousands of acres of land that were then parceled out. I think that's a detailed, exhaustive summary of what's going on. So obviously, we as a party, we stand in firm solidarity with Mr. Tendai Biti. What's problematic about this case is that you've got the spokesperson of ZANU-PF giving instructions publicly to the police to act in a particular way, to arrest the vice president of the main opposition. That's problematic. In fact, it flies in the face of his right to a fair trial. And that, before we go anywhere, the politicization and the trumped up nature of these charges becomes immediately clear. Why is ZANU-PF getting involved, in what should be clearly a civil exchange? Obviously, the police are going to act in the way they did. Everything can be easily explained by the fact that there was that political instruction. And we saw it previously in the case of Hopel Chingono. The minute Patrick Chinamasa says Hopel Chingono should be arrested, he's interfering with the first family, what do the police hurry up and do? He's quickly apprehended. We saw the same thing happening in respect of Henrietta Mushwaya's gold scandal. The minute the police are given an instruction by the First Lady to retract and, change a witness statement, they quickly do that. So against that background, we take strong umbrage. We are highly concerned with the weaponization of the law against our officials as the main opposition. A lawyer should not be interfered with in the course and scope of his duties, and the fact that he is a member of the MDC alliance should not open him up to further abuses we've seen here.
You talked about Mr. King Sharp. I don't know the real name. Who is that person?
I don't know what the details are there. All I know is that Ms. Tashiana Eleshini threatened Tendai Biti and said, I'm going to report you to Ken Sharp. The extent of his involvement, I'm not privy to that, but that's what she said.
Okay.